As a therapist who works with children of immigrants, I know that intergenerational trauma is one of the biggest factors that impacts us on a daily basis. Whether we know it or not, what our parents have gone through, our grandparents, our ancestors, it's left a mark on who we are today. Hi, I'm Sahaj Kaur Kohli, a practicing therapist, author, and founder of Brown Girl Therapy. On this channel, I talk about mental health, identity, relationships through the lens of being someone who is bicultural or a child of an immigrant. Hit subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. All four of my grandparents lived through the partition in 1947. This was the division of British India into what is known today as India and Pakistan. This partition displaced between 12 and 20 million people across religious lines. This created a refugee crisis and resulted in large-scale violence across the geographical state. Now that all my grandparents have passed away, there are conversations that I wish I had with them. There's one in particular that I tried to have with my maternal grandmother that didn't go the way that I expected. I remember going on a walk with my maternal grandmother and asking her what it was like to live through the partition, to live through the natural disaster of the big earthquake in Kobe in 1995. She's lived through so many traumatic experiences. I really wanted to understand how these have impacted her, but also how she might make meaning or understand or reflect on these experiences. Essentially, I wanted to become closer to her and understand how she thinks about her life and what she's lived through. But I didn't get that. Instead, when I asked her about her experiences, she got kind of upset with me. Why are we talking about this? What's in the past is in the past. When are you getting married? What's going on in your life? This isn't important. Essentially, she was just trying to be forward thinking and not think about what she's lived through. I found it really frustrating because I just wanted to know. I wanted to connect with her. I was able to put together later that she was coping in the only way that she knew how. She was taught that survival meant hiding her feelings, suppressing them, only looking ahead and thinking about the next thing that you can control. And honestly, those lessons didn't just stay with her. If I think about it, I can see how the way she is then replicated in my own mom. It was passed down to her children, and now I'm realizing that it's been passed down to me. And it's this passing down of feelings, behaviors, thought patterns that is called intergenerational trauma. And it's something I think that children of immigrants experience in very specific ways. So, what exactly is intergenerational trauma? Clinically, intergenerational trauma is the passing down of trauma responses, survival strategies, and emotional wounds from one generation to the next. And even if it's not passed down in the ways that we can see, through how people act, through how people think, through how people talk, it can live in our bodies. Research shows that trauma can change the ways our genes express themselves. This is known as epigenetics. It's one of the ways that our bodies remember what our families and our elders have lived through, even if we don't ever talk about it. It's how our nervous systems are wired. It's how we respond to stress. It's how we form attachments. These are all a product of intergenerational trauma. More simply, I like to say that intergenerational trauma is the pain that is passed from one generation to the next. Our elders' experiences, whatever they are, they don't just disappear. They shape family values, the way culture is expressed, the ways that emotions are or aren't talked about, communication styles, and even the roles that people are expected to play in the family. So how did we even come to understand what intergenerational trauma is? What we've learned through research that studies Holocaust survivors, descendants of slavery, and indigenous populations is that trauma is not just personal. It's systemic and it's collective. You didn't have to directly experience something for it to impact you. And for children of immigrants, this can be even more layered. You're not only inheriting family trauma, you're also navigating cultural shock, assimilation, and racism in a new country. Immigrant families often carry trauma related to war, famine, genocide, colonization, forced or economic migration, a loss of homeland, displacement, separation from family members, and even precarious immigration statuses. So what does it look like for us as children of immigrants when we inherit intergenerational trauma? Now, before I get into it, I want to be very clear. When people hear the word trauma, they often think of something catastrophic. This can be things like violence, war, natural disasters, historical oppression, all the things that I've been talking about so far. But I want to be very clear that trauma can also be in the micro. And I don't mean that it's small, I mean that it's more individual focused. It might not be something that a collective or a family experienced, but it might be something that one of your elders experienced. These can be things like financial abuse, domestic violence, a car accident. infidelity, divorce, whatever it is. These are still things that can result in intergenerational trauma. When someone goes through something that might be a micro trauma or a macro trauma, they often start to adapt to whatever it is that they're experiencing. They develop what is known as coping skills. And these can look like different things. Some of them are maladaptive and not so healthy, and some of them are more healthy. Things like drinking, avoidance, emotional suppression, going to therapy, talking about it, explosive anger, whatever it is, they start to learn how to deal with the impact of that experience they had. Let me illustrate this for you. A parent who lived through displacement might cope with uncertainty by becoming more hypervigilant or controlling. They might double check everything, plan for worst case scenarios. Then their child grows up in this environment and is raised by this more controlling, hypervigilant parent, and that child learns that safety comes from being perfect. Or another example, you have a parent who had to suppress emotions in order to survive their family dynamics. Then they have kids who never learned or saw vulnerability modeled. So they learn to intellectualize their feelings, to suppress what they're feelings, to diminish what it is that they're struggling with. You might not think of these things as trauma, but they're coping strategies that once kept someone safe. I also want to be really clear here that intergenerational trauma doesn't look the same for every family member. Two people can be in the same family and have the same parents and still have different expression of how that intergenerational trauma impacts them, how it leads to certain behaviors or thought patterns, in the same way that two people could go through the same experience. Let's say two people go through the same car crash, and one of them might not feel like it was traumatic, and the other one might struggle to drive and have symptoms of PTSD. We can't think of trauma as a one size fits all approach. Everyone experiences it differently, everyone is impacted by it differently, and the same goes for intergenerational trauma. So, an example of this might be two siblings being raised in the same family and having a parent who relies on explosive anger or drinking in order to manage their emotions. One of those siblings might start over functioning, might start wanting to fix things, might be someone who opts in and tries to please the dad, while the other sibling is someone who avoids, who opts out. They both are trying to survive in the same system, but they are finding safety in different ways. The thing is, in many immigrant households, trauma is not processed or discussed openly. Instead, it might show up as emotional distance, suppression of vulnerability, emphasis on survival and achievement over well being, and even just being forward thinking the same way that my own maternal grandmother was when we had that conversation. So then children learn early on not to talk about pain openly, that therapy is unnecessary or taboo. And if you go to therapy, you have to hide it or be ashamed of it. And many of us were even taught in non-explicit ways that our pain and our suffering is nothing compared to what our parents and elders have been through. That is a symptom of intergenerational trauma. We start to internalize guilt, shame, anxiety. And this is even more complicated when our trauma, when the things we've inherited don't even have a story. We are not told what our parents went through. We don't have history textbooks to read about what they experienced. It makes it easier for the pain and the trauma to be minimized. And even more so if you are a child of an immigrant or in an immigrant family where you are outwardly looking very successful, economically successful, it will lead to more reinforcement that you shouldn't be struggling, that you shouldn't have anything to complain about. But looks can be deceiving. Here are some ways that intergenerational trauma might be manifesting in your life right now. You may find yourself pushing nonstop, chasing the next degree, the next job, the next milestone, because that's what makes you feel safe. You've inherited the belief that constant stability is the only way to feel a level of safety. Or maybe you're someone who struggles to rest without guilt. Even when you're exhausted, you might hear that inner voice. Don't be lazy. Don't waste time. You may struggle to use your vacation days at work. That's not really you, though. That's the echo of generational survival that is living in your body. You may put everyone else's needs before your own. And this might be because you were taught, maybe not explicitly, that your worthiness is tied to how well you can love, how well you can be of service, how well you can be of use to other people. All of this means that intergenerational trauma is not just a story of the past. It's actively shaping how you live, how you love, and how you work every single day. So now that you know what intergenerational trauma is, you might even have an idea of how it's showing up in your day-to-day life. What can you do about it? First, start noticing family patterns and coping styles in your family. You can start to really pay attention to the ways that different family members deal with hard emotions, tough situations, communicate, set boundaries. relate to one another, think about work, success, achievement, whatever it is. Just start to notice what these coping styles are and where there might be some patterns. When you start to heal, it's not about judging those coping styles. It's about recognizing how they might have helped those before you, how they might have helped them stay safe, stay in a sense of belonging, stay connected to people. And then you get to decide, is this a coping skill I want to continue, or is it something that I might want to change or stop? Two, have compassion for yourself and elders. You are not in charge of breaking every generational cycle or addressing every form or aspect of intergenerational trauma in your family. That is way too much pressure to put on yourself. I also want to be clear that though your parents may have perpetuated some of these cycles, they also likely broke some generational cycles. So have some compassion for how you and your elders are working through some of this intergenerational trauma while acknowledging that maybe the trauma you've inherited just needs to be acknowledged and addressed rather than something that you constantly have to work through. Three, find smaller ways to break certain cycles. Maybe it's not about telling everything so openly to your family, but maybe it's addressing a family secret or being just a little bit more forthcoming about your emotions in some ways. Think about the small ways, the micro ways that you can start to break some of these cycles that help challenge this all or nothing mindset you might be struggling with. Consider healing practices that can help you feel connected to your ancestors and your cultural identity. Therapy is a great tool for healing, but it's not the only tool. Think about ways you can incorporate somatic practices, cultural practices, ancestral practices, anything that can help you feel grounded and connected while also allowing you to do this work to heal from intergenerational trauma. And finally, I want to be very clear that you didn't just inherit trauma from your family. Healing intergenerational trauma isn't about abandoning or rejecting your elders, your parents, your culture, your community. It's about reconnecting in a more intentional way. Remember, your ancestors didn't just pass down pain, they passed down resilience, creativity, stories, community building, humor, adaptability, resilience. I think I said resilience twice, but damn, they are so resilient. When you start to unpack the trauma, the bad stuff, when you are unpacking that suitcase that has been handed down and passed down from generation to generation, I want you to not stop there. I want you to think about the good stuff that you've passed down, the culture, the connection, the community, all of it. And I also want you to remember that your parents and your family and your ancestors, they didn't develop these survival patterns in a vacuum. Many of them were responding to systems of colonization, of patriarchy, of poverty, of racism. And they were exploring and trying to figure out what safety looks like in those systems. So when you're healing, you are not just healing personal pain, family pain. You are also interrupting those systemic cycles. And that is so powerful. So intergenerational trauma doesn't mean that you're doomed to repeat the past. It means you've inherited both wounds and wisdom. And now you have the power to decide what continues and what stops with you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.